The words came out of Tom Caldwell's mouth like they were nothing, like they cost nothing, like they meant nothing. Your opinion's noted, David, but we're moving forward. Tom didn't even look up from his phone when he said it. He was scrolling through something. Emails, messages. David would never know. What David did know was that something inside him closed, not like a door slamming, like a window sealing shut so slowly you don't notice, until you realize no air is coming through anymore. It was 9:23 a.m. on a Monday in May. David Mercer was 32 years old. He was holding a printed route map in his hand, prepared at 5:30 that morning. Construction zones highlighted in yellow, numbers checked, then checked again, and none of it mattered, because Tom Caldwell, 31, the owner's son, had just told him, without saying it directly, that his voice didn't belong in this room. This is the story of how David learned to stay silent, and what that silence cost him. David had been at Apex Logistics for 8 years. He started as a dispatch coordinator, moved up to operations supervisor 8 months ago. Apex handled supply chains for construction materials, concrete mostly, the kind of work no one notices, unless something goes wrong. It wasn't glamorous, but David was good at it. He knew the routes, the drivers, the delays before they became problems. 6 years on the dispatch floor teaches you things a spreadsheet never will. The promotion came with a raise and an invitation to the Monday management meetings. David thought that meant his opinion mattered now. He was wrong. The conference room sat on the 3rd floor. Long table, 10 chairs, fluorescent lights that hummed just loud enough to be annoying. David's chair sank slightly lower than the rest. The hydraulic was broken. He'd reported it twice. Nothing changed. At one end sat Gary Donnelly, VP of Sales, 15 years at the company. Loud voice, easy confidence. Gary closed deals, filled rooms the way cologne fills elevators. Next to him was Linda Shue, finance director, Wharton MBA, leather portfolio, glasses on a chain. She spoke in phrases like strategic optimization when she meant do more with less. And then there was Tom Caldwell, the owner's son, 31 years old, VP of operations. Not because he earned it, because his last name was on the building. Tom wore expensive sneakers, quarter-zip pullovers. He talked about disruption. Mostly he looked at his phone. David had been watching these meetings for months. He learned the rhythm, when to nod, when to look concerned, when to stay quiet. Mostly he stayed quiet, but he was seeing problems, real ones, routes that no longer made sense, schedules built on assumptions that were years old, contracts that looked profitable on paper and bled money in reality. David could see it because he'd lived it. And then came Fletcher. Gary walked in that Monday already smiling. "I've got good news," he said, pulling up a slide. "We just landed the Fletcher contract. Fletcher Commercial Development. 6 months. Strip mall construction past Route 22. High-volume concrete pours. This is exactly what we need," Gary said. "Consistent revenue, strong margins." Linda pulled up the numbers. Projected revenue, $340,000. Margins, 18%. Tom leaned back. "Sounds solid." 2 words. The decision was already made. David felt his stomach tighten. He knew that site. He knew that route. Route 22 had been under construction for months. 2 lanes closed. Delays averaging 40 minutes. The site was 47 miles out. Each delivery would take nearly 2 hours round trip. They were already stretched thin. Add Fletcher, and they'd need another driver or pull trucks from existing contracts. Those margins wouldn't survive that. David had run the numbers over the weekend, not because anyone asked, because he couldn't help it. With realistic delays, the margins weren't 18%. They were 9, maybe 10, barely profitable, assuming nothing went wrong. David looked at the papers in front of him, then at Gary, talking about relationships, at Linda, already reallocating projected revenue, at Tom, scrolling. David cleared his throat. The sound was small, but the room noticed. "Can I ask about the routing?" Gary paused. "Sure, Dave." David hated being called Dave. "The Fletcher site's past Route 22, right?" "Yeah, so?" "Construction's been adding 40 minutes each way. We're already tight on trucks. At 8 deliveries a week, we'd need another driver." He slid the map forward. "I ran the numbers with the delays included. Margins come out closer to 9%. The room went quiet. Gary smiled, but something behind it hardened. David, he said calmly, I appreciate the effort, but I've been doing this for 15 years. We adjust. That's what we do. He leaned back. You're thinking like a dispatcher, which is fine, that's what you were. But up here we're looking at the bigger picture. Linda nodded. Sometimes you accept short-term friction for long-term positioning. David opened his mouth. Gary didn't stop. Fletcher has 4 more projects planned. If we hesitate over traffic delays, we lose all of them. We're playing chess here. David looked at Tom. Tom hadn't said a word. He was still looking at his phone. And then, without looking up, Tom spoke. Yeah, I think we're good here, David. His voice was casual, dismissive. Your opinion's noted, but we're moving forward. 4 words. Your opinion's noted. David heard them, and he heard what they really meant. We don't need your opinion, we didn't ask for it, it doesn't matter. The meeting moved on. Gary kept talking. Linda asked about invoicing. Someone laughed. David sat there, holding papers he'd spent hours preparing, feeling something collapse inside him. Not anger, not hurt, understanding. He hadn't made a mistake in his math. The math was right. The mistake was thinking being right mattered. The mistake was thinking his job was to think. His job was to execute, to nod, to stay quiet. The meeting ended. David went back to his desk, sat down, opened his email, did his work, and never mentioned Fletcher again. 3 weeks later, the problems started. The delays were worse than he'd calculated. An accident shut down Route 22 for 6 hours. A truck broke down. They rented a replacement at $200 a day. The Riverside account complained. They hired a temp driver at premium wages. The Fletcher contract, projected at 18% margins, barely broke even the first month. Lost money the second. Gary blamed bad luck. Linda quietly adjusted the projections. Tom never mentioned it. And no one said a word to David. Not an apology. Not an acknowledgement. Not even a quiet "you were right." Because admitting he was right would mean admitting they were wrong. And people like Gary and Tom didn't rise by admitting mistakes. They rose by sounding confident, even when they were wrong. Especially when they were wrong. David learned something then. Being right without power is the same as being wrong. Rooms have invisible hierarchies, and he'd crossed one without knowing it existed. Silence wasn't just safer, it was smarter. 6 months passed. The meetings continued. David still attended, but he stopped preparing. No weekend analyses, no printed schedules. He sat. He nodded. He wrote notes he never read. When someone asked, "Any thoughts, David?" he'd say, "No, sounds good," because it didn't matter what he thought. They'd already decided. At first it felt like strategy. Pick your battles. But silence doesn't stay a choice. It becomes reflex, then habit, then identity. In October, Gary pitched another deal. Different client. Same problems. David saw it immediately. That same feeling in his gut. He opened his mouth, then closed it. What was the point? The contract went through. It failed even worse. They lost $60,000. They lost the client. They laid off the temp driver. Gary blamed the market. Linda called it a downturn. Tom said nothing. And David felt something unexpected. Relief. He'd stayed quiet. So when it collapsed, it wasn't on him. Silence had protected him. And that's when David understood what he'd become. Years passed. David stayed at Apex. Reliable. Steady. Quiet. He stopped going to conferences. Stopped taking courses. Turned down chances to get his bachelor's degree. What was the point? The people who moved up weren't the ones who knew the most. They were the ones with the right connections, the right name, the right look. David was useful, but he wasn't that. New hires came, younger, louder, full of ideas. David watched them pitch in meetings, watched Tom shut them down, watched the exact moment something dimmed inside them, like watching his own reflection. One of them, Marcus, pitched route optimization software. It was a good idea. Tom dismissed it. Marcus pushed back. "We're good," Tom said. "Let's move on." After the meeting, Marcus caught David in the hallway. "I don't get it," he said. "The numbers are right there." David looked at him. He wanted to say, "It doesn't matter if you're right. You're not here to think. You'll learn to stop trying." But he didn't. He just said, "Yeah, maybe try again next quarter." Marcus nodded. still hopeful. David knew he wouldn't try again. Or if he did, it would be the last time. David retired at 62. Small party, Costco cake, a plaque, 30 years of dedicated service. Tom gave a speech, thanked him for his reliability, his consistency, his loyalty. David smiled, shook hands, ate cake. No one mentioned Fletcher. No one mentioned the failed contracts. No one mentioned the meeting where everything changed. Because it didn't matter. He'd been reliable. He'd stayed. That's what counted. On his last day, David cleaned out his desk. In the back of a drawer, he found the folder, the route map, the schedule, the calculations. He'd kept them all these years. The numbers were still right. David stared at them, then threw them away. The thing about silence is it doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with a decision. It waits. It waits for the moment you learn that being right costs more than it gives. That the room was never built for your voice. And then, quietly, without drama, you stop speaking. Not because you have nothing to say, but because you learned that saying it changes nothing, and silence at least keeps you safe.